The wrong slide. All right, so I'm Anita Avedian, and I wanted to briefly talk to you about ShrinkSync before I introduce our presenter today, Wendy Douglas. So ShrinkSync is a digital networking hub for therapists. It's a free app for all therapists. We do have treatment centers on there as well, and some of the benefits are you get to receive client referrals and send referrals out, of course, as well too, as you're looking for resources. Job postings or search for jobs. We have many CEU events on there, and we also create announcements, including office space and speaker. If you're interested in speaking at different associations, people tend to post those there as well. So there is that directory for treatment centers if you're not sure where to place your client or what to look for. So we have plenty of information on that as well. Would love for you guys to spread the word and get your friends and colleagues on ShrinkSync as well. Today, I'd like to introduce Wendy Douglas. She's going to be presenting on dialectical behavior therapy. At the end of the presentation, we are going to have you guys complete evaluations. Rachel Tomasian will send that out, and then we'll send you your CEU certificates within the next 2 days. This webinar is recorded. If you are asking questions, that will be included in the recording, just so you know. And once it's recorded, it will be up on both Wendy Douglas's website as well as the ShrinkSync website. And so if you have colleagues who have missed this webinar, they can certainly watch that and get CEUs for that as well. Wendy Douglas is a licensed clinical social worker and has been specializing in dialectical behavioral therapy for more than 10 years. She currently has a private practice in Beverly Hills and runs open DBT skills groups in Sherman Oaks on Saturdays. She has previously worked at LA County Department of Mental Health, where she has the team leader for the DBT program at Edelman Westside Clinic. She also has a theatrical background, I can't talk this morning, and has been in such shows as The Mentalist, Bunheads, and Private Practice. Help me welcome Wendy Douglas.
Hi, how are you? I don't know about you, Anita, but I'm not a morning person. So I have coffee, and I hope you do too. I don't know where everyone's from. We're in California, we're in Los Angeles, and it's really, I have to process the weather first because it's like so muggy. I've grown up here my whole life, and we've never had this much weird humidity. It feels like Florida right now. So there's like, we're in the AC right now. It's blasting. So I might put a sweater on later, but I don't know if you guys are sweating, but luckily we're not because Anita has the AC on. Anyway, we're going to dive into emotion regulation, which is one of the modules of DBT. I don't know what the familiarity is of the group with DBT, but thank you. Oh yes, that's right, I have my thing. There are 4 modules that in DBT. So emotion regulation is one of them, and we're just going to be focusing on that. If you're curious about the other modules, sometimes I do other longer presentations, but mindfulness is a core of DBT, interpersonal effectiveness, and distress tolerance. And so we're just focusing on emotion regulation for the next hour, and I'll kind of dive right in. If you're doing a skills group, I mean, it can be anywhere from a 6 to 8 week module. Marcia Linehan, who's the founder of DBT, just updated her workbook. I'll show you. It used to be like really thin, and now it's like a monster Bible with 1,000,001 handouts. But it's actually it's a lot better. It's really good because she's a lot more specific and it's a lot more useful. You can use these skills with your clients in any capacity. In private practice, I see individual clients, and I refer to these skills all the time, just integrating them into my work. Generally, I'm psychodynamically focused, but it's just the way my brain works. But of course, in DBT, it's much more behavioral and cognitive. So let's dive into the first slide. Basically, why are we talking about emotion regulation? We want to be able to help our clients manage the really big emotions. I always say that emotion regulation skills help shave off the peaks and the valleys. So eventually, over time, we're shaping the brain so that we don't have really intense peak emotions or mania, and upset, and we don't have sort of the negative emotions, the depression, the withdrawal. And so by shaving that off over time, you see that the normal human wave of emotion gets a lot smaller and people's lives become much more manageable. I call it taking the edge off of depression and anxiety. Look at me, I'm like this. And trauma, of course. And an idea of DBT is to reduce suffering and have a life worth living. I always think that if you can manage your emotions and have control over your emotions, of course you're going to have a reduced likelihood of interpersonal conflict and interpersonal fallout, right? And teaching our clients emotion regulation skills gives them such a better sense of mastery over themselves. It increases self-esteem. They don't feel horrible. They don't have the emotional hangover, as I call it, right? No one's proud of themselves when they have outbursts. So, and then also, when you have more emotional control, you have more increased access to your wisdom, right? So you have, in DBT, some of you know, we talk a lot about your intuition or your wise mind or finding access to like your inner knowledge, which you can't access when you're freaking out, right? So the goal is to have access to that wise mind and build a life worth living. That's the prescription that Marsha Linehan has for everyone who signs up. So if you have questions, you can type them in, by the way. I'm going to be answering them as we go. And then we'll take some time at the end to answer questions as well. So I just want to say, emotion regulation skills are not crisis skills. So we teach these skills for people to use their emotions over time and difficult situations, but it's not for when really intense emotions are occurring or there's some sort of trauma or crisis. We teach a whole different set of skills when that's happening. So if there's really intense upset and people are at like a level 8, 9, 10 with their emotions, we would teach distress or crisis management skills. So that's a whole nother module. But I think it's really important to draw the distinction between when to teach these skills. Just so clients understand, these are not skills you're going to have access to during a lot of intensity. And why is that? Well, we talk about brain science. We talk about this a lot in my groups, actually, that, as some of you know, when you're in a panic or a crisis or something intense is happening, your prefrontal cortex goes offline. And we talk about, you know, the amygdala firing, and this is lizard brain, and it's fight or flight, and so everything in the body, which we're going to talk about, is going off, and you can't really make decisions when you're like, you know, fleeing from the oncoming saber-toothed tiger. So that's why we teach a whole different set of skills for distress tolerance, like holding ice cubes and deep paced breathing and walking and stepping back and going for a run and all kinds of other fun things, which we can talk about another time. But I put this is my favorite cartoon. I love Gary Larson. Isn't he just hilarious? But the crisis clinic, I used to work at Edelman for LA County, and this was on one of the supervisor's door. That was it, just like this cartoon. It pretty much sums up sort of our everyday work. Incidentally, I was the DBT team leader there, and so got to work with some of the more impaired and, I guess you would say, difficult clients, and DBT worked. DBT, don't I sound like a DBT commercial now? DBT worked for them, so it can work for you too. Yeah, anyway, I put the crisis clinic cartoon up there just because it's funny, that's why. All right, so let's talk about the model for describing emotions. Now, some of you know, this is all going to sound fairly obvious and simplistic, but it's so important to remember what's happening to the brain and the body. And I do a lot of psychoeducation with my clients about this, just because there's so much about brain science now, and I can recommend a million books for you if you're really interested in brain stuff. But this is the model that we look at and that we teach our clients in DBT. And for those of you with a CBT background, it's all going to sound very familiar. But in DBT, okay, I'm going to experiment with this cool little feature. Where's the little arrow? Oh, there it is.
Click on it. Yeah.
Click on it once. Okay, so let's start up here in the little cloud. See how it works. We always want to look at our vulnerabilities that we are walking into any situation with, right? So on any given day, I know in AA, there's an acronym HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And we're going to go through these in a little bit, but our vulnerabilities affect our ability to manage any situation. So always teach clients to really look at what they're walking in with. And then inevitably life happens, and then there's a prompting event. So something happens. Oh, that's a really horrible arrow. That's okay. There's a prompting event, which can be any trigger. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back is what prompts an emotion, right? And it can be external or internal. So prompting event can be something someone says. It can be an event just, that happens. The bus is late, or you get splashed with water by the oncoming traffic. It can be any event. It can also be an internal event, which would be like a automatic thought or a memory. Can also be a prompting event. And then inevitably what happens is, right, that triggers a whole set of neurological and biological changes. So our feelings, our thoughts, our body sensations. So, right, so I'm trying to think of an example of what a prompting event would be. I'll use something a client said recently. She was hanging out with her family, and she was having, she was with her mom, her dad, and her brother, and her brother and her dad started to giggle and have this great time together. And she was feeling all of a sudden that little interface was the prompting event for all of this jealousy that she had. And so she talked about how she was frustrated, and her thoughts were going wild, and sort of her body was tight and her cheeks were flushed. And then she was sort of maintaining all of that. So the feeling would be jealousy, right? And then, in here was the action. And so what she did was, I think she said something to her dad, like later she said, well, you didn't care about me anyway. I mean, it sort of came out of the blue to her family, but this is sort of a typical pattern that we observed, is that, a lot of it is internal, and then she sort of had an outburst, which she was ashamed of. So the emotion name, the original emotion name would be jealousy, right? And then she had what I call an emotional hangover of shame, because she didn't want to say that after she, because, her wise mind knew that this was, something she was experiencing internally and probably wasn't justified, but then the after effects or that she felt, kind of shaky, and then it triggers more prompting events, right? So we go back around in the circle. So that's sort of that's our little emotional cycle here, around and around and around. And so we talk to our clients about this to increase their awareness and their, what they know about how emotions work. And the great thing about this client, she's been in my groups for a really long time, so she knew exactly what happened. She knew the prompting event, she knew what she was thinking, she could identify her thoughts, she knew that the emotion name was jealousy, and she knew right away that the secondary emotion of shame. So she, in her body, so this is why we teach this to the clients, she could name all of this right away. She's so skillful. And it was really helpful, because she said in the past, if this had happened, it would have been a huge explosion, and she would have said horrible things. She would have stormed out. She would have made it a lot worse. And so in DBT, we talk a lot about not making a bad situation worse. Sometimes just teaching this can help with awareness. Do you work on the vulnerabilities too, or just focus on the prompting event? We're going to work on the vulnerabilities too. I'm going to show you the handout a little later today. I just want to say about the prompting event, and then we'll move on. Prompting events can be really hard to identify, right? Because it's not necessarily, it's the event that happens right before the target behavior. So the target behavior being I don't like to call it a problem behavior, but the behavior that people want to change is the target behavior when we're talking about DBT, the B in DBT. So the prompting event can be something really minuscule, and all of the vulnerabilities and events beforehand lead up to it. And we will talk about that, yes. Anyway, we can come back to that if we want. Some of you may know chain analysis, which would be what you do to get the client to really go back and look at all the events leading up to a target behavior. So if the target behavior is drinking, cutting, it could just be yelling, it could be withdrawal, it could be nail biting, going to bed too late, anything can be the target behavior. And chain analysis is what we do to break it down into the microseconds of what happens leading up to a behavior. And really the goal of the chain analysis is to increase awareness for the client. So this is just another way of looking at what we just did. So we look at all the vulnerability factors, the prompting events we try to understand, and then we look at, this is what we're going to be talking about. The interpretation of the prompting event is really important because that's the thought. And so this thought, which in DBT we call a myth, in CBT we call it just automatic distorted thoughts. In DBT we try not to use pejorative or judgmental language, so we call it myth. But we're going to talk about this in just a second. And then obviously we just went through the biological changes, the feeling name, which produces an action urge, which we're going to talk about, and all of the expressions and behaviors, and then after effects, or hangovers, as I call them. Interpretation of the event, and I'm going to show you a handout that you can use to go through chain analysis, which, by the way, clients don't usually like doing chain analysis because it's really long and boring. Not really, that's kind of a judgment, but it's a pain in the you-know-what to do because it takes probably a good 40 minutes to, when clients are new, to look at what prompted an actual behavior. Because a lot of times people come in, well, I don't know why I cut, I don't know why I drank, I don't know. That there's not a lot of insight into what led up to it in the beginning until they've really got the skills down and they've been through this a few times. If you're not doing DBT in therapy, you're not doing CBT, I still encourage you to try to do some chain analysis because it's a really great skill to have. And it's a fascinating study of really breaking down human behavior. I just want to say the interpretation of the prompting event. So we really want to look, let's just use my client's example with her brother. She saw her dad and her brother laughing and giggling together, and then she was able to go into the whole story. Well, I was normally like that with my dad, and we haven't been in a while, and all of the thoughts that and it takes a while for a client to really sit down and think about it. And she finally, I think, came to something like, it was an abandonment fear of like, oh, he's going to like my brother more, and I'm going to be left behind, or I don't belong here. And so if you can get the interpretation of the event, then you really understand why all of this happens. But to get the client to do that is really important because generally it's probably going to happen again and again, that same interpretation. And we all have that, right? We all have these patterns that we carry around, these myths, if you will, that trigger us. And so these are our triggers that come in our little suitcase of fun. Okay. This is the handout I was talking about. This is taken from someone else that adapted one of Marcia's handouts, but you can use this. I sort of have a little PTSD when I look at it because there's so much work in a session, but not to discourage you. But if you look up here, you can see in tiny little letters, if you're not blind, actions, body sensations, cognitions, events, and feelings. So you can code it here, like you can put there's an event, and then you can talk it through with the client. You can say, okay, what did you do then? Oh, that must have been an action. So it's A, B, C, E, F. Oh, and then what did you think? Oh, you had a thought about it? That's the letter C, right? The vulnerabilities always come first. So the vulnerability factors you want to discuss, you can discuss them before or after. But then you go through all the events. So, you saw your dad, your brother said what? So that would be an event. You just heard your brother say something. And then what did you feel? Well, I was starting to feel angry. So that would be the feeling. So you'd write all this out all the way down here. And then you write the consequences. And then right down here is the behavior. And so see this little thing up here? This is a little bomb. And then what you're wanting to do is recreate it. So there's a little skillful person here. Sorry, I'm looking at this up close because it's so tiny. You can see my face coming closer to the camera. But this is the target behavior, and this is the more skillful person. So what the idea?
Dawn is asking, can we get copies of the presentation?
You mean this handout? I can upload this handout to my website, and this is all recorded too, so you can go back, right, Anita?
Yes.
The idea with this, the whole idea, if you take anything away from this, is you want to be able to have the client increase their awareness, trace exactly what's happening to them from moment to moment, so they're not on a rocket ship to the moon out of control, that each moment is an opportunity to insert a skill. And so then we would go back and say, well, what could you have done here? When you felt your body start to tingle, when you felt your cheeks start to flush, what did you know to do? And then you go back and talk about all of the skills opportunities. And as you can see, that would take a little while to do in a session, but that's sort of the goal. But once you have this set up with a client, I mean, even with couples, you could use this. Let's look at what you guys' triggers are. Once you establish this, it gets much easier, to access with the client. So I hope that makes sense. I just put this cartoon in here because I thought it was really funny. He's saying, no matter how intense things get, you manage to keep a cool head. What's your secret? And he has an ice cream cone on his head, which I guess you could look at as a skill for somebody. But yeah.
Camera made a comment. She could use this with several people.
Yes, you can use it. It's helpful for anybody. I mean, it's helpful for me too. Just as a therapist, to really increase my own awareness of what prompts me in subtle ways, and out in the not so subtle ways out in the world, right? So here I'm going to teach the skills right now. She updated the acronyms. DBT has a lot of acronyms. It used to be please master. Probably might be insulting to some. It got changed, which is probably a good idea. So she changed it to ABC please. And basically this is the core of the emotion regulation skills that we teach to our clients. So this is sort of our shorthand, and this is what we're going to do right now. So let's talk about accumulating the positives. And again, I always feel like I have to apologize for it sounding so basic, but I hope it doesn't. I hope it feels like something you can apply. Okay, so this is what we teach. We always teach that in order to have a life worth living, you have to increase pleasant events. You have to be balancing out the wants to the shoulds, right? If you're only working, if you're only doing the checklist of stuff you have to do, you're not going to be very happy, right? You're going to just feel like you're going to just feel like a pack mule working away. And so we want to talk about what do you need to do to balance out your enjoyment, and which is part of reducing vulnerability, right? Because you're having a good time, and you'll find that a lot of clients just don't know how to do. I mean, a lot of us don't know how to do this, right? So increasing pleasant events. Oh, I have my page here. Let's see what I want to show you. Marcia, in her book, and by the way, here's my commercial again. I swear. There is a whole checklist in this workbook of pleasurable activities that I'll find. Well, I was going to show you, but it's in here somewhere. Basically, all the things that people sort of need to be prompted to remember how to do, like going for a walk, going to see a play, taking a bubble bath. Anyway, I'll find it in a second, but it's in here in the book. But you can get this book for $25 now. It's really reasonably priced. And by the way, all of the worksheets that are great for handing out to clients are I'm putting them in a link at the end of the webinar. where you can she has these worksheets downloadable for free. So you have access to all of this for free. You can go to the link, go to the website. You can download. Oh, the book that is entitled DBT Skills Training, the Handouts and Worksheets. Can you see? It used to be red and black, and now after 20 years, it's been updated. And she's really thought about everything. I'll take my commission now. Thank you, Marsha. So she's thought of everything, and it's in here. But I will say just about the pleasant events. She has this hilarious list of it's 3 pages long of 200 things, and it has things on there like gambling or things that you wouldn't really think you should be saying. But the idea is anything in moderation can be pleasurable. So yeah, I recommend checking out the workbook and just having it on hand because it's pretty awesome. Oh, and by the way, this is...
What's the name of the author in this slide?
Oh, it's Marsha Linehan. This is her book. I mean, there are other books out there too, and they're good too. But yeah. So okay, accumulating positives. So that seems obvious, I know, but you'd surprise how many people, if you really ask them, what did you do today that really felt good? I mean, did you get your nails done? Did you take a few deep breaths? We did one group where we challenged the clients to hug a tree. They thought it was funny, but yeah, we just really encourage people to challenge themselves and find what they enjoy. Focus your attention on the present, which is our mindfulness skill. No multitasking. Do one thing at a time. Don't be on your cell phone while you're at a movie theater. Participate, engage fully. So that's one of the ways to stay fully in the moment, which is one of the basic skills we teach over and over and over again in DBT. It's so challenging for all of us, right? To do one thing at a time. And then by doing positive events, it's part and parcel of one of the skills we're going to learn, which is opposite action. So even if you're feeling depressed, even if you're feeling like you don't want to do anything, finding one thing you can do is the opposite of that emotion. So it has that quality. And then while you're doing it, don't dwell on your worry thoughts. This will, I know it sounds silly, but I'll tell you my own personal story. My self-involved self-disclosure, which is what we call it in DBT. I went to Disneyland with my daughter, and I was having such a good time at Disneyland. And I'm not kidding you, I did this. Every hour, it's like, oh, it's going to be over in 5 hours. Darn it. Oh, we only have 4 hours left at Disneyland. Oh, and I caught myself. I'm like, I'm doing exactly what she said not to do. So I really had to throw myself into the moment, but leave it to my adult brain to sort of worry about leaving Disneyland. I know, Disneyland sounds like torture to some people, but it was really fun with my daughter. Okay, so, oops, did I go back? I did. Okay, begin my foot. So then building mastery, that's our B in ABC. We really want to teach clients to have a sense of accomplishment and mastery. So many come in just feeling horrible about themselves to begin with, which is not true, of course. They're fairly well accomplished. Many of my clients, they're all really smart, a lot of them, and they just have the worst self-esteem. So building a sense of accomplishment and reminding people what they are doing, inevitably, even those without a lot of skills are doing skillful things. And so we want to validate the things they are doing. But to build self-esteem, encourage them to do something difficult. And if it feels too difficult, break it down into smaller steps, or take it down a notch, or if it's not difficult enough, and then increase the difficulty over time, make it harder the next time. So building mastery is a huge piece. She talks about the apparent competence of a lot of borderline clients. So this idea that they're presenting as if they are really competent. I mean, I have worked with physicians and stockbrokers, and there is this, they're very articulate and well-spoken, yet on the inside sort of everything is, they're really suffering. Their suffering is severe. So try not to be fooled by the apparent competence. it doesn't mean there isn't a really big skills deficit. So that's why the building mastery is in there too. Coping ahead. Now this is new. She added this to the catalog of skills. Cope ahead is like the behavioral rehearsal. So I'm kind of going through this with you. It's a newer skill to me. So think about the situation that is likely to prompt a problem behavior. Check the facts. We'll talk about that in a second. She wants the client to write out a prompting event without any descriptors or evaluators. So my dad was talking to my brother. My dad said, "I like your sweatshirt." My brother said, "Thanks, Dad." They tickled each other. They laughed. That's just the facts, right? Nothing else. So that is the check the facts skill. And then naming the emotions and actions likely. So then you're really walking through exactly what you think would happen in advance. Decide what skills you want to use in this situation. I imagine that this client will come across a situation like this again. It's her family, so she's bound to see them again. So she might have a game plan that she goes in with, and she would write it out in detail what she's going to do. And then she would talk about the emotions and action urges. She would do imagine. She would sit and imagine very vividly how it's going to feel when she gets irritated. She's going to imagine herself maybe getting up, taking a breath, maybe ordering a lemonade. I don't know. She's going to imagine all these things, and then this is her effective rehearsing, right? And then always relaxing after imagining something like that, because it triggers, even the rehearsal triggers something. Okay, what if one is working with clients you believe have BPD, but they don't know it? This would be wonderful, but I don't want to traumatize the client. I don't think the diagnosis matters. I never focus on diagnosis. I always focus on whether or not the skill is effective. So I always say, if this is the problem, or this is what you're struggling with, then we have a solution, and this is what might work, and this can work for anybody. So you don't have, in this skills, all the research is showing that this can be used for anyone at all times, so you can sort of introduce it that way. Just the fact is that these skills are effective. We always joke around that this should be taught in high school. It should be a course. It's like a basic course. So this should be taught to everybody. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I don't worry about. I don't care about the labels. In my head, I know of what the labels are, but I just talk about what's effective. And even with clients who are borderline, sometimes they feel validated by that, and they get really hung up on it and focused on, well, I'm borderline. I don't care. As long as this works and you're improving, then that's what's important to me. And by the way, just as a side note, I really think BPD eventually they're going to say it's curable, because I think over time, with enough massaging of the brain and enough work on these skills, when someone is willing, which is really important, when they're willing and they really apply this, they will not meet criteria for BPD after a few years. I guarantee it. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, I think it's treatable. And in fact, curable, which is a distinction. I do think it's curable for some, if they're willing. That was a lot of caveats, sorry. Okay, cope ahead. Please, here's the vulnerability piece that we were talking about. Yes, we can all use these skills, right? Totally. I know a few people that could probably use these skills. Too bad they're not logging on. Right? I'm going to send this link to certain friends and be like, oh, check out my webinar. Anyway. Just kidding. Please know your vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities. I know AA does halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. There's another one AA has. If someone can remember it, it's the second one. It's like halt and then a second one, and I never remember. So if you know what it is, type it in. The PL is for reduced physical illness, and you would be amazed how many people don't go to the doctor, they don't go to the dentist, cavities are growing, they're not doing basic health care, or they're not treating illnesses that they have. They're not resting when they're sick. So we just remind people, And when you go through a chain analysis and you say, well, what was going on for you? And they're like, oh, well, I was sick. I'm like, well, that makes it really hard to cope effectively if you're sick, right? I mean, who wants to be dealing with something difficult? Balanced eating, of course, big one. I call it hangry, right? Have you ever been so hungry you just get angry? Hangry? Some people are hangry people. I'm not. I just get low blood sugar and pass out. But yeah, balanced eating, and this is really important for people who are restricting or binging, because binging leads to a lot of shame, secondary emotion. So this is a vulnerability. Mood altering substances, of course, is another one, right? If you've coming off of a sleeping pill or you're using it all, of course, that's going to make you vulnerable. Sleep, huge one for everybody. I'm circling it, but you can't see me circle it. Here we go. Sleep. There we go. For obvious reasons. I don't know about you, but when I haven't slept, everything, the world just seems like difficult. Yeah. Exercise is a biggie, right? Some people, this is really important, but getting exercise. So that's our please, right? Vulnerability is just a shorthand so you remember. And then I added this one, exposure to a situation. Chronic exposure is a vulnerability, right? So if you have a friend where there's been conflict before and the same conflict happens again, to me, that's a vulnerability, that there's like a little mini trauma around it, or there's a response that you're prepared for. And I think of that as a vulnerability already. Or family, you know your mom gets on your nerves after 2 hours, so you're vulnerable if it's the 3rd hour. Okay, so that's please. Okay, we're going to talk about opposite action. Yay, so exciting. We have about 20. I'm going to fly through it pretty quick. Minutes. Yeah, I'm going to leave the end for questions too. Okay, opposite action. So every emotion, let's talk about the action urge first. Every emotion has an automatic action urge, right? This is so basic, but difficult to remember sometimes. We don't have the little effects, but I was trying to hide the the second. So don't look here. Just look at this side. Pop quiz. What's the action urge for sadness? So automatically, sadness is something that's going to want to make you withdraw, close down, retreat. Anger, on the other hand, based on the biochemistry of the brain, anger triggers a whole different set of systems, fight or flight, so your blood's going to get pumping. And so the action urge for anger is to strike, so to move towards something. And what that looks like is to yell or scream. It's just a natural action urge. Joy, so the action urge for joy would be to embrace, to move towards. And then fear, what's the action urge for fear? It would be to withdraw or to run. Fight, we often talk about fight, flight, or freeze as the responses to fear. So there's other emotions too, and you can think about them yourself, and of course all of these have combo platters, I call them. Combo platter of sadness and anger, or anger and fear is often together, right? Okay, so and I forgot to make a slide for the actual opposite to emotion action.
Do you have this handout?
I do.
Maybe just show it.
Yeah.
In the camera.
Yeah. We'll just talk about it. So what would the opposite to emotion action for sadness be? So if the action urge is to withdraw, then the opposite action would be to what? Just kidding. I know I can't hear anybody. I'm like, Bueller, is anybody there? The opposite would be to get active, right?
Shauna says, come closer. Tracy says, stay.
Exactly.
Lauren says, immediate attention.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there everyone is. Cool.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's what we would want to teach. And then what's the opposite to for anger? Calm. Anita says calm, to listen. So there's a lot of backing down. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the compliment. Actually, Marcia will say it. in her mildly Southern accent, it must be Southern, you just want to be a little nice. You want to gently avoid, and actually be a little nice. And actually what she says is you want to take the opposite action all the way. So if you're angry at someone, and you get a lot of this with clients, well, okay, I'll be nice, and then they're like this. But no, it's a genuine, all opposite to emotion action all the way, where you're going to actually feel the niceness, right? That's really hard to do. Can you think about that? Opposite to shame. What's the action urge to shame? Gentle with integrity, exactly. Shame, lower your voice. Yep, so retreating, shames to hide. So she says the opposite to emotion action for shame is what? Well, I'll have you guess first. Think about it. She says the opposite is tell your secret to people who will accept it. Tell your secret over and over and over again. So if something is shameful, and Brene Brown, have you seen Brene Brown's vulnerability? Exactly. She does, Brene Brown is the hot ticket, and you can look at her TED Talk about shame resistance. So she talks about, but Marsha will say you don't want to tell your secret to people who won't listen or validate you. And one of our clients used the example of a gay man coming out in the Midwest or somewhere where they wouldn't accept him, that the dialectic is he may actually not want to come out amongst that community if it's going to be really invalidating. I mean, unless he's like sort of a power player and standing, but that may not actually be a good idea. And you can debate that, but something to consider. So that's the opposite to emotion action, and this is actually the action urges, but if you see the opposite to emotion action, that might be something you want to teach to your clients, but only, this is really important, only if the emotion is unjustified. So my client, who was very jealous of her brother, was that a justified emotion or unjustified emotion? I mean, a justified or unjustified emotion? It was, she came to the conclusion that it was unjustified. So that's when she wants to do opposite action. If it's justified that maybe her dad just gave her brother $1 million and gave her nothing, then it would be justified that she feels jealousy, and then we would want to work on a whole different set of approaches. But if it's justified shame, or justified you did something that conflicts with your values, that is shameful, and so you'd want to do you would actually want to maybe make amends or apologize. If there's something legitimately to be afraid of, then you do probably want to avoid that situation. I had some nervousness or fear around starting the webinar. I'm fine now, by the way, but in the beginning, of course, I was like, ooh. And so my action urge was to, probably on a subtle level, I mean, I wasn't about to run out of the room, but it feels fearful, and so my opposite action is just to actually complete the webinar. So does that make sense? And I want to do it all the way. So this is the worksheet I made for you. I'm not allowed to use Marsha's slides in a presentation, so I recreated my own version for you. Worksheet for changing emotions with opposite to emotion action. So this is what you want. Why did it go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2? Well, it's supposed to say 5, 6, just so you know. What you want to do, this is how you would talk through the opposite to emotion action with your client. So you want to always identify the vulnerabilities, ask them what the prompting event was, just the facts, not the opinions, and then you want to get them to talk about whether the emotion was justified or unjustified. And then what do they want to do? And then how would they practice doing the opposite to emotion action all the way? And then you want to sort of walk through the behaviors, thoughts, body, the memory, everything that happens. So does that make sense? That's the opposite to emotion action skill, which is very helpful. Now, I will say, this might sound like impossible for certain clients, right? They're sitting there depressed. They're like, I don't want to leave. And you're like, well, just go out and go for a hike. That's the opposite to emotion action. And they're like, are you kidding me? So one thing we talk about in DBT always is willingness versus willfulness. And while of course we always want to break any situation down into smaller bits, it's really important for the client to look at their own willingness versus willfulness. So are they actually digging their heels in, doing the opposite of what probably their wise mind would say would be skillful? Are they avoiding just out of anger? Or are they practicing willingness? And willingness looks really different. Willingness is doing the best you can. So sometimes you can sense a client's willfulness versus their willingness. Now, if they're legitimately saying, I literally can't move, I can't get out to do anything, I would just break it down into smaller steps. But you really have to tease out the willfulness versus their ability. So I hope that makes sense. I think that's pretty much it. We're doing good on time. That was great. So I'll just point out, Marcia's does a great job of breaking each emotion down so that the client can refer to each emotion and sort of walk through what happened. And so I'll just give you, this is Marcia's, an example from her her manual. So this is her handout, and I only put up part of it just because of I didn't want to include too much, but this is for jealousy. You can see she talks about when it actually fits the facts, and then she gives you examples, and then she really wants you to talk about whether or not it's justified or unjustified, and then she talks about exactly what to do. So she's kind of thought it all out, right? All the way opposite to actions. So stop spine, no avoiding, change your posture, and it goes down the page. But the workbook is really helpful for looking at all the individual emotions. And by the way, one of the things I'll say, I'll get off the slide, is that a lot of the clients, especially with BPD, have so much trouble identifying what their emotions even are. And so we spend a lot of time in our emotion regulation module teaching them to identify, simply to identify and be mindful of what the emotion is and then to name it. And so there's, in Psychology 101, sad, happy, anger, fear, love, surprise, interest, disgust. But she adds guilt, shame, envy, and jealousy. And so we go through each emotion and talk about how they unfold, which I think is adolescents, same way. I mean, I think it's exactly the same for adolescents. I mean, in terms of teaching them, they might actually be more vulnerable to emotion mind, I would think. The adolescent brain, there's a lot of information about how they're designed to be behaviorally more risky. So I think all of this is great for adolescents. In fact, my next goal is to start up a teen group. So
Tracy's asking about formal training in DBT.
Formal training in DBT, well, people on autism spectrum. Wow, I don't know if I know much about that. That would be very interesting, actually, to see if I don't know if there's any research on it, but to the extent that they could apply the skills, I just feel like this is helpful for everybody. The formal training, there isn't a lot, right? There isn't a lot of training on DBT. You can go to behavioral tech and look that there's a certification process now for getting certified for DBT. It's a huge commitment. It's a few years. It involves having getting a mindfulness practice down and doing silent retreats and recording sessions. And it's like, yeah, I started the process myself, but I'm a little daunted by it. Also, to be on a DBT team is part of the training. If you're wanting to do formal training, the team component, a team of therapists that you sit with every week is a requirement. So I'm looking at it. I can see that's really helpful.
Carolyn was asking about autism spectrum.
Oh yeah, I sort of answered that. I don't really know.
Molly, question about opposite emotion action.
After going through this and reviewing the questions many times, do your clients start to implement the steps on the spot? Yes, it's exactly what happens. So a lot of the clients in my group, within about, there's a little like shift around 3 to 6 months where there's like an aha, once they have enough of the skills accumulated, where there's an aha moment where the breakdowns start feeling more positive and more, oh my gosh, I know exactly what I need to do. So they have all the language after a while. And yeah, you really see them know exactly where, and we do this, right? As therapists, you know exactly what you could have said or, maybe could have done differently. So they know, and the goal of the mindfulness too is the non-judgmental stance. That even if you know, the shame resilience is to sort of not beat yourself up about what you know you didn't do, but to really take that in, not judge yourself, and keep the practice going. So, but yeah, it's amazing. You start to see clients behaving so skillfully. And then what happens is, the amazing thing is, they end up being more skillful than their environment. And then you start to see how their environment really doesn't support their skillful behavior, or they start to feel like, oh, wait a second, I was skillful. My family wasn't. They are not skillful. Holy cow, I'm not the black sheep here. They are. No, just kidding. But yeah, so you start to see the shifts.
Do you help people living with others who have these symptoms?
Do I help people living with others who have this? That's, yeah, the family members of. I mean, that's an important part of working with teens. That's sort of prescribed in the treatment, that you would work with the families of the client, the identified patient, because when the families have the skills, then everybody gets better. A lot of times there are partners, in a couple, one of them might struggle with behaviors and the other one is like, I don't know what to do. But when you get the partner in the relationship to have the same language, then you can tell the partner, well, when this is what's happening, why don't you ask them to use a skill? Say, why don't you use opposite to emotion action? And it can be helpful for everyone involved. Are there specific techniques you would use for a client with BPD whose attendance of sessions is very irregular? Well, when that starts to happen, that becomes therapy interfering behavior, and then we go back to commitment strategies. So I would spend less time working on skills and a lot more time just talking about commitment strategies, which is a square one strategy, and they don't always like that because they're not able to talk about what they don't want to, but we would spend a lot of time just talking about your willingness and willfulness, and the commitment or the signed contract or whatever they came in for. I would just always come back to that, commitment strategies. Well, you signed up for this. You're paying for it probably. Tell me, let's go back to a conversation about what prevents you from being here. And probably you could do a chain analysis on what makes them late, a chain analysis that makes them not come or show up, because that does happen. What if the identified patient isn't in therapy? Well, that's a problem, right? Then that's the most frustrating and vulnerable part, I think, because when they're not hooked, the first 3 months or not being in therapy at all is really vulnerable time, because they're not in therapy, they don't have the skills, they're suffering immensely. So it's a matter of getting them connected, right? And that's, to me, it makes me very nervous when I have new people, especially if they're highly suicidal. I don't sleep very well because they don't have the skills yet to be able to manage the symptoms, and I feel like it's a very volatile and vulnerable time. But that's why the hospital, keeps happening. The hospital ends up being sort of, eventually it'll be a deterrent, but the hospital is sort of a tool. But someone is typing something. I can't believe
the family members having to deal with IP.
Yes, exactly. Oh, look, I found it finally. Look at the pleasant events list. I just want to show you because it's really funny. Look at that list. That's one page, and then there's 2 page. There's so many. There's so many things. I don't know why I get a kick out of it, but I guess it's because there's funny things like playing hockey, working with clay or pottery, going on a picnic, buying small things for myself, going to museums, thinking religious thoughts, lighting candles, going bowling, doing woodworking. I don't know. I don't woodwork, so. Anyway, there's a lot of really cool ideas. So if a client's like, well, I don't know what to do, you can just say, well, please tell me there's something on this list. Watching TV in moderation. Thinking about sex in moderation. So anyway, any questions? Let's see, we have about 6 minutes. By teaching who is in therapy these skills and these phrases could model for the identified patient and possibly engage in idea. Oh, it's an idea. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I say this, you can start to teach some of this in individual therapy to get them hooked in. I mean, you could, if you know of someone who's a little, I guess you'd say treatment resistant or doesn't want to acknowledge diagnosis or, doesn't want to do a group. I run into that a lot.
My therapist.
Don't be my therapist.
Molly was asking what list is that again? The name of that list?
Oh, it's the Emotion Regulation Handout 16. And again, the link, let me show you. This link here, wait, right here, I couldn't get it to underline, but right here, you can type that in, I think with this little R, into the internet, and the list, there's literally a link to this whole book for free. And you are allowed to use it in your individual therapies and your groups and with your couples, with clients. You can download any of these. So all of this is available. I just put some mindfulness resources here too. Also, here's my website where there's more information about my groups. I do have 3 groups in Sherman Oaks on Saturdays. There's space available in the 2nd and 3rd groups. But they're amazing. It's a big commitment, of course. I ask for 6-month commitment at least. Most clients stay for a year. It's every Saturday for a year. But I'm telling you, their lives change, and it's amazing. It's so rewarding. It's my favorite part of the week. They work really hard, and it's an open skills group. So for me, I don't require clients to be in DBT therapy with their individual therapist, but they do have to be in a therapy to be able to process it. If someone needs a comprehensive DBT program, I will refer them out, for instance, if they're really high risk. But the Open Skills Group in Sherman Oaks is a great adjunct to your individual therapy if you want, if you know a client needs skills and they need a little extra something. So let's see. Yes, as you could. Don't let my therapist know, and don't be their therapist. Oh, thank you. Someone put the little link. Thank you, Shirley. Yeah. So how are we doing? We have 3 minutes. What should we talk about?
I think people are typing.
Oh, thank you for the information. Thank you. I really enjoyed doing it. Again, this is just one of the 4 modules of DBT. It's not the first one we start to teach. It's a little more advanced. Usually in DBT groups, we start with mindfulness or distress tolerance because people need, thank you. People need the distress tolerance skills, the crisis skills, usually up front a little bit more readily. So we don't really start with the emotion regulation skills. By the way, the interpersonal effectiveness skills are like my saving grace because they're so effective for people who have interpersonal conflicts and trouble asking for what they want, or even just trouble saying no. So maybe one day, Molly, we can do an interpersonal one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's my take on emotion regulation. Yeah,
she just joined.
Yeah, we can do the other modules. I think anybody can use these in their private practice or with their clients, wherever you are. I like to demystify DBT. It feels really inaccessible to me unless you're willing to sign up for like 9 years of, not really 9 years. It feels like it. Oh my God. I have judgments. I'm overwhelmed by it. But I recommend this especially to anybody, interns, just start working through the worksheets and self-teach yourself with a client on this. Figure out what skill they should be working on. Take it in the session and do it. And if you go through this long enough, you're going to learn the skills yourself. So it's accessible, and although DBT seems like a big mystery to a lot of people, but it's so helpful. Modules, I would love to talk about DBT. Thank you everyone. I really enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. There's loads of information, and I know people, I think what it is that people feel very challenged sometimes working with these difficult clients, and they don't know what to do other than refer out. So there are ways to approach all of this. If you have the tools, it'll bolster your own self-confidence. So that's all I have to say. Now I have to go out in the humidity. I'm actually going to a pool later, so we'll walk out to the humidity and I'll dunk in the pool. Probably the same thing. But thank you.
And I'll say one last few words. She's absolutely amazing. Yes, we will invite her back. It was very useful, and I love that we have tools we could actually use and incorporate, and you made it sound so simple, which I love. So thank you again. We'll invite her back in the future. Thank you everyone for attending. Our August webinar is actually going to be with Dr. Tess Warshow, and we're going to have that webinar on Monday, August 10 at 9:30 a.m. and it will be about resiliency. The title will be something around "It's not over until it's over," but it will be helping you as a therapist with clients building resiliency. All right, well, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful week and have a wonderful day. Until next time, stay tuned, and you will receive your CEUs once you fill out the evaluation in the next 2 days, and this recorded version will be available on Wendy Douglas's website, our website on StrengthSync, and you can have other people watch that for CEUs. Thank you and take care. So you can end the... Yeah, Ronatus has provided better insight into using DBT. Okay, I'm ending the session. Great.
Yay!